Is this a must-have Lord of the Rings game?
In Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth, you'll strategize and draft off a dynamic pyramid of cards to enlist various races, battle, and find or dispose of the ring. Is this better than Seven Wonders Duel, the game that inspired it?
So as a Lord of the Rings series fan, is this a must-have Lord of the Rings game?
I would say it's a must-have Lord of the Rings game because what I like about it is it doesn't feel like so many of the other contrived, gimmicky skins that you see just to sell things. It actually has substance. I really like Seven Wonders Duel, but it doesn't seem like an exact copy. And all the art kind of goes off of Lord of the Rings itself or the world building that I really like rather than just copying the movies.
The surprising part is how good it looks. And then just the bright colors, which I don't really think of Lord of the Rings very often. I think of Lord of the Rings as a little more darker and depressing and the world as being a little more drab.
And that's even thematically for Lord of the Rings, where it is almost a battle between the light or the good forces or all that's bright and beautiful for the shadow that's coming in to place over Middle-earth. So how did you think of it as a non-Lord of the Rings fan?
For me personally, you get a lot of leeway when you execute the art well. There's been so many depictions of Lord of the Rings at this point. If it was more bog standard Lord of the Rings depictions, then I think I would be way less favorable on the theme. But they've executed it so well that it gives it a lot of punch, I think.
Yeah.
So this is a re-implementation of one of the really great games you love, Seven Wonders Duel. How do you think this one stacks up?
I really think it stacks up well. It's different enough that it's kind of neat, especially if you are a Lord of the Rings fan. But it still has those same elements of the pyramid, how the cards work. That's very interesting. The desire of some of the cards versus your unwillingness to expose more for your opponents and the multiple ways of victory. I think that it stacks up very well. They have this track where
the track is so cool.
I know where the ring goes and then you have the riders behind you. It's very cool.
And this whole thing shifts, which I've never seen a component like this in board games.
Yeah,
ever.
it's really
and
good.
This is like moves. So depending on which side you are, you will adjust the track differently.
Yeah.
Which I think is so cool and neat.
Yeah, and that doesn't exist in the Seven Wonders Duel.
No.
They have their own thing, but I think that this is very cool how they've done it.
I agree. Like each area in which they've replaced something, I think they've punched it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So to me, the military track in Seven Wonders Duel, which was very basic, you're just going up a track and getting some slight rewards or punishing your opponent, was okay, right? But and it's streamlined, but they've actually incorporated an area control element in this, which is quite streamlined and I think is much more interesting and thematic too. Of course, the ring track we talked about is very thematic.
Yeah, it's very well done.
And I really like a big boon for me too is I wasn't a huge fan of the different wonders that you would then draft at the beginning. So I really like that they now have the shared incentive ones.
Yeah, that's different.
And then that gives far more flexibility, in my opinion, to change the tempo of the game. Whereas before you had to kind of have those double turn ones that you would then have on your own. So now we can see like, hey, you actually want those exact same resources that I want. It sort of increases that tug of war feel.
So it's a little different, but it's definitely an enjoyable alternate.
And Snips, a part of the game that I didn't love, which is the beginning draft where you pick one wonder and then I pick two, like that kind of elongated the game a bit. So they snipped it out and then streamlined it. There aren't additional scoring cards too, and like those were fun but added extra overhead. So I feel like they streamlined everything that I really liked about the game and cut the things that were okay but not as strong.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah, it's done really well.
2 words to describe Lord of the Rings Duel.
Okay.
Reveal. Stovetop. I want to hear nerdy first though.
Okay.
But I can't wait to have some stovetop like stuffing. What is that?
I had trouble with my concepts, but like I think I can explain them.
Great.
So nerdy in the best way. So it kind of hits all those nerd buttons. It's Lord of the Rings, which is kind of like the epitome of all nerdy stuff. And I love it. I love what they've done with the Lord of the Rings stuff. They represented the different races
Yeah, it's
as
true.
well as like you're literally playing a board game. So a combination of the two makes this an extremely nerdy game to play.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah. If you were really into Lord of the Rings and maybe your spouse wasn't, you would just sneak it out quickly and be like, hey, you want to play a game? And they'd be like, yes. And then you'd be like, here it is. And then you would just make sure that they have no time to rebuttal you.
You've already set it up. So
You've already done, yeah. And then they like, but the longer you stew on the idea that you're going to play the Lord of the Rings board game, the probably less attractive it gets to someone who's not into the Lord of the Rings. But if you open up with all the visual appeal and just have it on the table, I think that just like 1-2 punches them into wanting it.
Don't even tell them it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
You just play it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, see if they can connect the dots, because I bet most people could.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they could. But at least, again, it's not the representation of the movie exactly, which I really like.
Yeah.
So they've done their own art.
I've got core, so we'll start with that, because to me, the brilliance of this design, which is always the biggest thing I appreciated from Seven Wonders Duel, is this pyramid mechanism with the revealing cards. And so they've done things where you can see a lot of the board, but then there is an element of luck, but it's implemented in a way that it can be luck depending on what sort of level of strategy you're playing it. So if you are just playing with someone brand new, it may feel like luck, which might be exciting for some people. You kind of have that slot machine reveal. But if you're playing at a higher tier where you start to understand that maybe revealing that luck for your opponent may be worrisome for you, then you're even calculating that in advance and you're seeing sort of who has tempo on the board. And so it becomes a lot deeper than that. And I think that's where that brilliance is, because it works for multiple layers of strategy, multiple sort of tiers of people.
Yeah, I think that's one of its strengths. And I think the same thing with the Seven Wonders Duel. That's, you can actually do quite a bit of calculating. There is some luck involved, but the core of it is you can use strategy because it's well set up, well designed.
How about Stovetop?
Stovetop. I mean, I think that relates a little bit to this. So I was trying to think of something where you can't neglect any one thing. And so it's kind of, I like to do a lot of kitching. So if you're cooking multiple things at once, it's like, if you let something go for too long, it's going to boil over. Or like, you're trying to maybe do several things at once, but ultimately you want to like finish one dish kind of thing.
What a good
analogy.
analogy.
It's very challenging to do. So since there's multiple ways to win as well as for your opponent, you can't totally neglect what they're doing.
Yeah.
So even if you're kind of going for like a ring victory, for example, if someone else is putting their tokens on the world board there, you have to keep an eye on that. Like, so that's why Stovetop, you have to keep an eye on everything.
Sure.
Otherwise something's going to get away from you.
Brilliant. I totally agree.
Yeah. You can't just attend to the one dish.
Yeah. But you want to try and be strong in a few so that when you have to clamp down and lock in for your end game victory, that you can then execute on that. Because then I think if you telegraph too much that you're going for a victory on that board, then you can be easily thwarted. But if you've got a couple at your disposal and you can pivot and then sort of pivot better than your opponent, then that's where I think the victories come from.
Yeah. How about tense?
Tense because, I mean, I wonder if you feel this too, but while you're playing, especially as we're leading up to the third round, I just never feel like I'm safe. I never feel like what I'm doing is necessarily winning me the game. But it's also on the knife edge where I feel good about what I'm doing and I feel like I have a chance to win. But that could be easily thwarted, and I'm always worried about what you're doing. Would you agree?
Yeah, it can be very, I'd say, tense leading up to that.
Yeah. What are your experiences like? When do you feel at your most tense?
Third round. Yeah. For sure. Or like if you know that all of a sudden you have neglected something for too long or you took it for granted or whatever, then if your opponent seems to be really taking off in one area, it becomes something that you're not worried about to something that's like, I sure hope that the next cards aren't.
Right.
And
constantly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that
Doesn't
too.
go away.
No, totally. Biggest downside for Lord of the Rings Duel.
Okay, go.
Go.
Impressive.
I find in Seven Wonders Duel and in this game, they kind of suffer from the same thing, less so in this game, that when you are in control or when you are being controlled in this game, it can feel a little cruel or it can feel quite oppressive.
I think we can talk about both of ours at the same time. That's what Runaway sort of is. But it's interesting you think less on this one than the other one. I feel like it's more on this one. For Runaway, which was mine, where I thought that if someone has a chance to, like, once they're ahead on some things and they like continue to hold that, and it's very hard to sway it. But I thought that was more on this one than Seven Wonders, where I feel like because maybe there's slightly more factors, it's harder to get to the point where you're like actually going to be running away with a victory no matter what you do. So I feel like it's very close to the end to actually be a runaway, whereas this one, we've run into situations where beginning of the third age, you lose.
If there's some sort of unequal play at the table, so maybe you just played better than me this game, it can feel very runaway in that circumstance, and then it feels hard to get back. So that snowball effect of then it just, like, for the rest of the game, it cannot feel great. And is that what you're sort of getting at too?
I think it's the same thing. Where
exactly
that
the same.
has potential.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like that's slightly more on this one than the other one.
Gotcha.
I think it's harder to get to that point in your dominance.
Yeah.
On the other one.
Yeah. And so that's where the learning curve is going to be higher. And I think it's one of those things with chess, for example, like if someone is more skilled at chess and they take on someone who's less skilled, it's unlikely that the person who's less skilled is going to have a ton of fun.
And I feel like as well, this one to me feels shorter
somehow
than the other one.
Gotcha.
So I think maybe because it's shorter or quicker, maybe it's not as brutal, or you can just play another one right away, or it's very short.
Right. So yeah. It's got the Lay's potato chip, not just one feel.
Not so bad for that oppression.
Yeah.
But
because we're talking like 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's actually quite a quick game.
Yeah, totally.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, so. And tons of choices. I think that's the virtue of this game, is super fast, tons of choices. And I think, just to jump into my final thoughts then, is that's what I would say is the biggest selling point, is the choices in the quick time play. I think that there's lots of tug of war happening, which is exactly what I want out of a 2-player game. And I think it's very charming with the new art, even more so than the last one. And paths to victory that I just find very interesting. And just, I think the design work in this, there's a lot of uniquity to it compared to what was on the market. Things are approaching it more now. This Duel tagline has become much more popular, but this is the granddaddy of them, and I think it maintains it with this new release. So I'm going to give it an A for me. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think definitely an A for me for a 2-player game as well. Like, the differences that I kind of like about it, or not just like, but it's nice that they're different, is this one's a little quicker. I think it has less options of what to do, so you're deliberating less, which makes it shorter. And that can be nice on, an evening after work, whereas you don't want to necessarily pull out some of the longer ones. So this one is a bit more concise like that. The art's really great. Yeah. And it does hit a bit of those Lord of the Rings buttons too, if you're a fan of that. So
that's you.
I think it's great.
Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth has a brilliant core mechanism, but this game has the best core mechanism of any of the 2000 board games I've played. Discover the strategy board game that everyone should steal from next.